What I've got for you now, actually got something special. We're gonna read a chapter from this. The Further Adventures of Xena, Warrior Princess. This book came out, just like shortly, sometime, after the 5th season. Really, sometime in the middle of that infamous 6th season. It's just a collaboration of multiple other stories that were written by a number of different people, some of whom worked on the show themselves, and some other people as well. But I'm gonna go ahead and read you one of the stories here from this book. And we'll probably get back to other stories in this one later on. But let's go ahead and get started with one chapter from The Further Adventures of Xena, Warrior Princess. The story we'll be reading is called Immortal Desire. It was a dark and stormy night. No, she muttered, bent over the creased parchment scroll, unrolled against a plank of wood cradled in her lap. That's not it. And scored a thick black line of ink through the words. Her mind worked furiously to invent a new opening line. Gabrielle, the day dawned like a lover's caress. She got as far as lovers, with caress still in her mind, not on parchment, before again obliterating the line of rapidly scribbled text. That's not it either. Gabrielle, the afternoon was too beautiful for words. Probably because she couldn't find any words. Not any that worked. Not any that didn't just lie there on the page, evoking neither image nor emotion. There wasn't any romance in the words, no singing rhythms, no compulsion to keep reading to find out what happened next. Gabrielle... Abrupt frustration sought release in a garbled, indistinct, yet eloquent exclamation. Something between a howl and a roar as she clutched her head in despair. Gabrielle! Startled by Xena's battlefield bellow, Gabrielle glanced across the coals of their breakfast fire. What? You've been muttering over that scroll ever since breakfast, Xena declared. It's a beautiful day, Gabrielle. We had a good dinner, good night's sleep in a cozy little glade, even better breakfast. There's a lovely water hole just down the slope, ideal for bathing, which I know because I've used it already. Gabrielle blinked. She did have some dim recollection of Xena calling out to her that the water was perfect. Are you implying I need a bath? I might imply that you should go soak your head, Xena enunciated. But no, I'm merely suggesting you stop fretting over whatever it is you're doing. You're ruining my day. You're mending gear, Gabrielle noted, marking the pile of leather in Xena's lap, as well as the length of sinew clenched in her teeth. No wonder her words had been slightly distorted. How can I be ruining your day? I happen to like mending gear, Xena explained, when I have the time to do it in peace. When warlords aren't attacking, and villagers aren't dying, and gods aren't disrupting my life. None of which, for a change, is happening, and I'd like to enjoy it. She paused. If you don't mind. Sorry, Gabrielle heaved a huge sigh. I just can't get it to come out right. Xena pulled the sinew from her mouth and threaded the awl. Another poem? Gabrielle waved a declarative hand, absently noting ink flying from the reed pen in a gloppy dollop a ghouly distance away. Now I've given that up. I'm no good at poetry. Shocksers are better at poetry than I am. White teeth flashed briefly as Xena grinned. Then try writing a song. If he can, you can. You don't understand, Gabrielle said plaintively. I'm blocked. I can't find a good beginning. Xena hinched one shoulder upward in a negligent shrug. Why not start at the end? Gabrielle stared at her. You can't start a story at the end! Why not? Because you have to learn what the story is about before you write the ending. Xena observed her with an infuriatingly bland expression. You can't make up the end first? It was exceedingly aggravating discussing this with someone who couldn't understand the craft. How am I supposed to know how it ends when I don't know how it starts? Gabrielle demanded. It's rebelling, refusing to let me find out how it wants to be told. How it wants to be told? All stories have opinions, Gabrielle explained. You have to find one you can deal with and then begin. Xena's eyebrows arched. You make it sound like it's an enemy. No, not an enemy, Gabrielle frowned down at the scroll with its crossed-out beginnings. A friend, but sometimes a difficult one. A stubborn one. Xena grinned. No basis in real life, then. Gabrielle grunted faint appreciation of the comment, distracted by the blacked-out lines on the scroll. What was the perfect opening? Xena went back to mending gear. So, you're saying you don't know how the story ends, begins, or what happens in it? Gabrielle nodded glumly. How do you expect to write a story if you don't know what happens? I never know what's going to happen, Gabrielle explained with some asperity. Someone who wasn't a writer clearly couldn't possibly understand. Part of the fun is discovering what comes next. She looked meaningfully at Xena's mending. Stories aren't like gear. It's never one stitch after another, each one identical. My stitches are never identical, Xena put in dryly. But a collection of unexpected happenings. Gabrielle ignored the interruption. You string them together and eventually you see what the story's about. Well, if you don't know how the story starts or ends or even what's going to happen, why do you even bother? Because it's a challenge, Gabrielle explained. It's an adventure. Uh-huh. Xena chewed thoughtfully at the awl, eyeing the scroll. You're always scribbling something. Where do you get your ideas? Joxer had asked that once before. She never knew how to answer it. How could anyone not know where ideas came from? They were always there in her mind, arguing over who deserved to see the light of day first. Of late, no one in her mind was arguing anything. Inspiration, Gabrielle replied despondently, but I seem to be lacking it lately. Well, what's inspired you before? You, she said promptly. Hercules, Autolycus, some of the adventures we had. I don't know, just things. Xena's smile was slow. Love? Gabrielle, recalling the second attempt at an opening line with its reference to a lover's caress, felt the blush creep up from throat to forehead. Xena's knowing smile grew into a grin. Uh-huh. There's nothing wrong with writing about love, Gabrielle muttered, especially when there's no appropriate male in your current life, your real life. Gabrielle, mouth twisting, couldn't suppress a resigned sigh. That's an understatement. Well then, write about that, Xena suggested. Write a story about your perfect man, someone who could sweep you off your feet, the man of your dreams. Xena's expression was languorous, her tone slow and suggestive, frightened with feminine innuendo. The ultimate fantasy. The blush remained. I don't have one, Gabrielle muttered. Xena snorted. You're the writer, she said. Make one up! The water was perfect. So was the glade, the sun, the day. Gabrielle set aside her scribbling long enough to partake of the water hole, washing strawberry blonde hair, scrubbing its skin left untended too long. She was too fair to tan the way Xena did, but she had gained enough permanent color so that she didn't burn too badly anymore. And calluses to boot. Her training with Xena and the Amazons had accounted for many of them. There was little about herself Gabrielle felt was truly feminine, the way men supposedly liked their women, but she had taken to the active life. She thrived on it now, even if it allowed no time or opportunity for a so-called normal life. Gabrielle pushed back off the shallow bottom of the water hole, floating on her back. She employed hands and arms as fins to keep her body moving slowly. She wore only a thin, gauzy tunic, chopped off at the shoulders and thighs, too self-conscious to swim or bathe in the nude while out of doors. Odd, she thought, that she had no compunction about bearing her midriff in everyday clothes, but when she came to getting in a lake or river, she wanted the illusion of more propriety. You just never knew when a stranger might show up. Just now there were none. Only Xena, a short walk away, camped behind a screen of reeds and fern, still assiduously mending gear. Certainly Xena would chase off any importunate strangers who happened to hope to catch a glimpse of a nearly naked Gabrielle. Not that it would precisely inflame their desires, she told the sky overhead, floating comfortably. Maybe Xena's right. Maybe I should make up the perfect man and write about him. Drifting there, she thought about it. Was there a perfect man? Could there ever be a perfect man? Handsome men, yes, she'd seen her share. Kind men, either. But the perfect man would have to combine all the elements Gabrielle found most attractive and compelling, binding them together in a stunningly masculine, strong, handsome body, because, of course, she did have her preferences in how a man looked and moved, even though she'd never seen it put together just the way she'd like it. Well, maybe. Hercules comes pretty close, she murmured. Tall, strong, broad in the shoulders, narrow in the hips, perfect proportion, tanned, though I think I actually like dark hair better. Hercules was a mountain lion, all sun-kissed skin and hair, but Gabrielle had always found the Black Panther more compelling, more dangerous. Dangerous, she thought? Is that what I want? No, of course not. She wanted someone who was kind and gentle and unafraid to be tender. A man unafraid to speak of his most innermost emotions. A man unafraid to cry. A man willing to communicate and listen to her innermost thoughts and feelings. Gabrielle's mind began to knit together the attributes and aspects she found most intriguing. Suddenly the picture presented itself. The image of the ideal man. Her ideal man. She stood up abruptly, busily writing in her head, and splashed through the water to the bank. A cursory toweling with an rough length of old curtain dried her enough to stand the faint breeze against her skin, and then she knelt and gathered up the implements of her craft, left sitting beside her clothing, wood plank, parchment scroll, reed pen, and a small pot of crude ink. The sunset behind him was glorious, but he was even more so. Gabrielle sighed. Inspiration, at last. Having scribbled away half the day, foregoing all but a swig or two of watered wine and an apple, Gabrielle stretched out languorously in soft green grass, drowsing on the bank beside the water. The nap was blissfully pleasant, with the gentle sun warming her skin through the now dried tunic, the faintest of breezes teasing her hair. She smelled coals, wood smoke, herbs and flowers, the scent of crushed grass, the barest tang of drying ink. Best of all, she couldn't smell herself anymore. Xena had been right about the bath. Gabrielle stretched in casual abandon, eyes closed. She smiled, pleased with the day's work. All it had needed was the right inspiration. What is this crap? Gabrielle sat up and spun around onto her knees with a stifled grasp of shock. A man. A man's voice. A man right there, standing over her, holding her scroll, reading her scroll. Suddenly, she wasn't afraid anymore. Only angry, and somewhat embarrassed. Gabrielle sprang upright and attempted to snatch the scroll out of his hand. She failed. He dangled it over her head. She was not tall. He was. Short of attempting to leap into the air after the parchment, which would be exceedingly undignified, there was nothing she could do. A smirk and edged smile she found most annoying curved his mouth, outlined by a thin black beard. Gabrielle summoned the tone of command she had heard Xena used. "Give that back!" The smile widened. "And permit you to write more of this drivel? I think not." "Ares," she growled, "what are you doing here?" His feigned innocence had never fooled her. "Passing by." "You're a god," she said pointedly. "You never pass by. You only come when there's a reason. When you have a reason," she amended. The gods knew she and Xena never had a reason to want his company. Ares arched eloquent brows. He was tall, dark, handsome, if in a cruel way. He was unquestionably strong. He wore black leather. He moved like a panther. Gabrielle blushed. He waved the scroll at her. "Is this what women want, Gabrielle? Is this what women really want in a man?" He paused suggestively. "Is this what you want?" The blush deepened, but so did the anger. Oh, he murmured in mock solicitude. "Have I offended you? Or have I merely uncovered your fantasy?" He had an infuriating smile and employed it to good effect. "Do you dream of me at night? Were you dreaming of me just now?" Gabrielle crossed her arms tightly, wishing she had her staff. It wouldn't do any good against Ares, but she wanted it anyway. She glared at him, and then realized she was wearing next to nothing. With a garbled blurt of disarray, Gabrielle snatched up the damp curtain towel spread on the nearest bush and swept it around her. It wasn't dry yet, clammy against her flesh, but it did cover much of her against his amused observation. Ares grinned, displaying white teeth. "I can see through that, you know." Gabrielle clutched the fabric more tightly, still glaring. "A gentleman would never say that," she declared between her teeth. "A gentleman would never look." He waved the scroll again. "Well, according to this, a gentleman is not what women want. According to this, women want what bears a striking resemblance to me." He spread both his hand, striking his pose that threw all of his more masculine attributes into relief. She gritted her teeth. "You are so arrogant." "So is the man in here." He dangled the scroll before her face, then abruptly tossed it aside. She followed its path with her eyes, wanting to snatch it up and guard it against him. But he had already read it, and now he'd make it a weapon against her. If she let him. Gabrielle straightened her shoulders, lifted her head, met his eyes squarely, not flinching from the man who wasn't a man at all, but a god, and one who took so much pleasure in discomforting people, as well as sending them off to kill one another. "No," she said, "you are not what women want. The man in there may bear a slight resemblance to your physical appearance, strictly superficial, I do assure you, but he's nothing like you. There's kindness in him, and tenderness, and honesty, and loyalty, devotion." "You make him sound like a dog, Gabrielle." "Do women want a dog? And gentleness, and a good sense of humor. He's willing to laugh at himself, not to take himself too seriously, to honor his mother. Hera insists on that. And to admit when he makes a fool of himself. Sorry, no can do. And he likes dogs and cats and children, and flowers in the meadow, clouds in the sky. But can he juggle?" She'd ignored his interruptions up until then. That stopped her. "Juggle?" He waggled dark eyebrows. "I never take myself too seriously, Gabrielle, but then I don't take anyone too seriously. Certainly not mortals. How could I? You exist for our amusement." She realized then she didn't need her staff. She didn't need a dagger or a sword. She didn't need any kind of weapon when she had her tongue. and a certain knowledge. Gabrielle smiled at the god of war, then presented her challenge and victory in one unerring blow. Xena doesn't want you, Ares. Oh, indeed. That worked. Well enough that he was momentarily struck speechless, something she'd never witnessed before, and attempted to cover it by disappearing in a shower of sparks. Gabrielle grinned deliciously. Gotcha! She bent up to pick up the discarded scroll, brushing it free of debris. She unrolled it, reading swiftly. Now, where was I? Xena awoke just after dawn. She lay there a moment beneath the blankets, savoring the warmth. Automatically, her senses stretched out to make note of Gabrielle. Still sound asleep from the sound of it, Gabrielle had come back from the waterhole grinning gleefully to herself, obviously pleased with what she'd accomplished. Xena had asked her how the writing went, but Gabrielle had waved her off, saying something about telling her a story later, but after eating a quick dinner, she'd lost herself in the scroll again, muttering about getting it down before the light died, and Xena never did find out what the story was. She supposed it didn't matter. Something had sparked Gabrielle's imagination again, which was far preferable to listening to muffled exclamations of dismay and frustration. She sat up, finger-combed her hair out of her face, then peeled back the blankets. She'd start breakfast soon. They needed to get back on the road. Xena rose and then paused. Disorientation swept in, seizing her without warning. For a moment she was in darkness, and then abruptly she was elsewhere. The small encampment was gone. Gabrielle was gone. The morning was gone. She stood in a meadow at midday, blinking in the sudden sunshine. What? She began, and then fell silent. The meadow spread out before her, sweeping across rolling hills, displaying a vivid carpet of every wildflower known to man. Do you like it? He asked. I did it for you. She swung around, hand grasping for a weapon, but none existed. That, too, had changed. Ares? Do you like it, Xena? He bent, plucked a crimson flower, held it out to her. Isn't it lovely? She stared at him. The expression was not one she recognized. She wasn't sure his face did either. It seemed uncomfortable with the new arrangement of his features. Or would you prefer a blue one? The flower in his hand was no longer crimson. He seemed nonplussed when she didn't answer. Abruptly, the flower disappeared entirely. An instant later, he was pressing something small, warm, and furry into her hands. Here, you like kittens, don't you? She cradled it absently, noting its purr as it nestled against her. Ares? Or I can get you a puppy. Would you rather have a puppy? Ares! Look at the clouds, he said, gesturing skyward. Aren't they lovely? Lovely? Was not a word she ever expected to hear from his lips. Not in describing clouds. She gave them the most cursory of glances, then fixed her eyes on him again. Are you ill? She asked. Or is this some kind of joke? His brows drew together. You wound me, he murmured, moving closer. I created all this for you, and you insult me. He was very close now, and insufferably large. Xena stood her ground. I think you've hurt my feelings, he told her. You don't have any, Ares. See, you have hurt my feelings. Broad shoulders dropped, lips turned down. He was the picture of absolute dejection. Can we talk about this, Xena? What's wrong with you? She blurted. Nothing that a smile from your lips could not cure, he told her earnestly. Xena blinked. I must still be asleep. This has to be a dream. No, he said, shifting closer yet. This is real. Xena, every bit of it. The flowers, meadow, clouds, the kitten. She could smell him. It was a clean, masculine scent with the faintest undertang of something she couldn't name. He was a god, after all. Could she expect him to smell like a man? And what was he doing standing so close, so intimately? And then the kitten was gone, though she couldn't say when it had appeared, and her hands were clasped in his. Xena, he murmured, pulling her down to the grass. Look at the flowers, the clouds. She jerked free and stood up. I don't want to look at the flowers, she said. I don't want to look at the clouds, and I want to know what you're doing here and what you want. His face reflected hurt. I'm here to spend some time with you, Xena, to see if we can't make a new beginning. She stared down at him. Even seated on the ground, he was a large man. A large, leather-clad man. A large, leather-clad man with black hair that somewhat disconcertingly curled against his neck. A thick and corded neck, perfectly balanced by extreme broad shoulders. Xena promptly pinched herself on the arm, hard enough to lick the brief hiss of pain. The meadow remained. So did the flowers and the clouds. The kitten was still absent. Ares was abruptly standing next to her, again, reaching for her arm. Let me kiss away the pain. Xena took one long step backward. Are you mad? She demanded. Did some idiot steal your body when you weren't looking? This isn't you. His face was set in lines that, on another man, might be called kindness. It's who I am now, he told her warmly. For you. For me? For me? She stared at him wildly. This is some kind of joke. Well, I won't fall for it, Ares. Underneath that pasted-on facade of tenderness is a monster who isn't happy unless men are dying for him, invoking his name in pointless battles. This charade you're undertaking now won't get you anything, Ares. I know you too well. He merely continued to smile. Am I tender then? He asked. I was so hoping you'd notice. Flowers, she said, imbuing the word with abject disbelief. Clouds, a kitten? Is this a new kind of campaign, Ares? He reached out for her again, recapturing her hands. Xena, let me be gentle. Let me be tender. Let me be kind. You know the other part of me. The tall, strong, handsome warrior god of undeniable sex appeal who can protect you against all harm. Now let me listen to you, Xena. Let me know what's in your heart. Let me share what's in my heart. Undeniable sex appeal, she echoed. There's so much more to me than that, Xena. I've just been unable to see it. I've been too shy to let you see it. Shy? But now I should. Now I see I must. His head was bent over, lips hovering. Let me show you who I really am, Xena. Gabrielle! She shouted. Gabrielle started awake. That battlefield bellow again. She scowled sleepily up at Xena, who stood over her. What? Time to get up, Xena said, turning away to the fire. You must have been sleeping like the dead. I called your name 4 times. Gabrielle levered herself up on one elbow, peeling hair out of her face. I was dreaming. I know. You were talking in your sleep. It was the strangest dream, Xena. I know that too. You muttered something about clouds and flowers and kittens. Gabrielle sat upright, now wide awake. I did? And something about tall, strong, and handsome with undeniable sex appeal. Xena tossed her a grin across her shoulder. Guess writing about your perfect man gave you something good to dream about. Perfect man, Gabrielle echoed. Then, oh, ick! Ick? Xena tossed her the water skin. That's all you have to say about dreaming of the man of your fantasies? Gabrielle let the water skin flop next to her as she dropped back down to her bedding, sealing her eyes shut with her hands. He wasn't, she muttered. Not the man of my fantasies. Or yours either. Well, shake it off, Xena advised. I want to get going. The dregs of her dream were starting to slip away, which was precisely what Gabrielle preferred. Nodding absently, she climbed out of her blankets and staggered off into the brush, looking for a suitable tree or bush. Afterwards, she went down to the water's edge to wash her face, trying to clear her muzzy head of the incongruous images her too fertile imagination had come up. Gabrielle. She leaped to her feet and spun around, vowing to never go anywhere again without her staff. Black leather and a blacker expression loomed over her, scowling fiercely. You lied, he hissed. None of it worked. And then the grassy verge was gone from beneath her feet, and she was in the water, rump plantly in the sandy bottom, legs splayed out. After a shocked moment, she spat water from her mouth and slicked hair back from a face that felt numb. Gabrielle? It was Xena this time, observing her with raised brows. Thought you took a bath yesterday. Gabrielle blinked at her. Is he gone? Is who gone? Gabrielle opened her mouth to answer, then clamped it shut. She didn't dare speak his name, or Xena would know that somehow, unbelievably, inconceivably, she had managed to invoke Ares while writing about her perfect man. That she had managed to dream he was Xena's perfect man, Xena's ultimate fantasy. No, it would not do to tell her that. Her face was burning. Never mind, Gabrielle muttered, and climbed out of the water.